We just moved into our first home. It was small, but ours. On day 3, our neighbor knocked and said, "I hope you're not planning to use the driveway. That space belongs to me now." I thought she was confused, until I came home and found her SUV parked diagonally across the entire slab. When I tried to have it towed, she screamed, "I've lived here longer. Seniority means something." Then she slipped a letter into our mailbox claiming squatters' rights over the garage. But it wasn't until I saw her in my backyard with a tape measurer and a forged deed that I realized. This wasn't the first house she'd done this to. We bought our first house in February, just outside Yakima, Washington. Nothing fancy. 3 small bedrooms, 1 bath, a drafty detached garage out back, and a driveway that ran along the side of the house. We were excited. Not because it was perfect, but because it was finally ours. My wife and I had been renting junk apartments for years. Broken dryers, leaky ceilings, landlords who ignored every call. This little place, with its ugly brown trim and sloped floors, was our escape. We signed the papers, took the keys, and cried in the car before going inside. We moved in on a Saturday. It was cold, but dry. Our backs were sore, and half the furniture was still in boxes. But we didn't care. We were home. 3 days later, we met Margie. Knock on the door. I opened it holding a cup of coffee. She didn't smile or even introduce herself. Just said, "I hope you're not planning to use the driveway. That space belongs to me now." I thought I misheard her. "You mean the driveway attached to our house?" I asked. She nodded. "That was supposed to be poured on my property line. They messed up the angle years ago. I've been using it ever since. Seniority matters around here." "Ma'am," I said, keeping calm. "We just bought the house. The driveway is included in our property lines." "You'll figure it out," she said, and walked back to her house like she hadn't just said something insane. I thought maybe she was just confused. Old. Tired. Maybe she thought the line ran different than it did. So I walked to the garage and looked around. Concrete slab. Our fence line started at the end of it. All clearly marked. Then the next day, I got home from work and saw it. Her massive white Suburban was parked diagonally across the driveway. I'm talking full wheels on the concrete, not a little bit. It was blocking the whole thing. I stood there with my hands full of grocery bags, just staring. She wasn't parked in front of our house. She wasn't visiting. She meant to do this. I walked over and knocked. No answer. Left a note on the windshield. No response. That night, I parked on the street. My wife was pissed. "Call someone," she said. So the next morning I did. First a tow truck. The guy came out, asked for proof it was mine. I showed him the deed. He looked uncomfortable. She came out when I pulled up and said she owns the slab. Said if I touch her car, she'll sue me. Said she has paperwork. "Do you believe her?" I asked. He shrugged. "I've seen weirder. You might want to call the police." So I did. Officer Ramirez showed up that afternoon. Friendly enough, but didn't do much. "She says it's hers," he said. "You say it's yours. Unless I see a court order or a surveyor's report, it's a civil dispute. Not criminal." "So she can just block my driveway?" He hesitated. "I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying the law needs proof." I was furious. Felt helpless. That night, she slipped a manila envelope into our mailbox. Inside was a typed letter claiming possessor rights over the garage. She said she had maintained visual and physical control of the structure for years. She said she intended to apply for squatters' rights if we continued to challenge her territory. It sounded rehearsed. Like she'd written this before. I spent that whole night digging. Found old property listings for our house. Went through the county website. Found public complaints from 2014, 2017, and 2020. All about a neighbor making claims on driveways and garages. All filed by previous owners of our address. Same exact issues. Margie had done this before. And now she was doing it again, with us. It got worse. On Saturday, I walked into our backyard to check on the fence. And there she was. She was standing on our grass with a yellow tape measure and a clipboard, measuring the lawn and writing down numbers. She'd already drawn orange chalk lines down the side of the house. "What are you doing?" I yelled. She didn't even flinch. "Surveying discrepancies," she said. "There's going to be a correction filed soon." I threatened to call the cops again. She laughed. "You think this is my first time?" she said. "People like you never last here." I wanted to scream. My wife wanted to move. I started documenting everything. Photos, Notes. I kept a folder of every crazy thing she said or did. I installed cameras. I got a copy of the official survey lines from the city. They clearly showed the driveway, garage, and backyard all belonged to us. Still, the cops wouldn't act. The tow company wouldn't touch the car. Margie was too careful, never crossed the fence, never broke a lock, never left a scratch. Just stood on the edge of our life and acted like it belonged to her. That's when I decided to beat her at her own game. I was done playing defense. I started with a paper trail. I went down to the Yakima County Recorder's office on my lunch break and requested copies of all property complaints filed on our street over the last 15 years. Cost me $20 and an hour. I didn't just find Margie's name. I found a pattern. 3 houses. All next to Margie's over the years. All had filed official disputes about her, using their driveways, blocking their garages, or moving boundary markers. One file even had photos of her putting up fake fence posts in someone else's yard. But here's the twist. One of the names in the complaints, a woman named Rosalind Davis, was still living nearby, just 5 blocks down. Her house used to sit right next to Margie's until she sold and moved away. I found her on Facebook. Sent a message. She responded in under an hour. Margie? She wrote. That woman is a parasite. What did she try to steal this time? I called her that night. Rosalind didn't hold back. She waited until my husband was in hospice and I was alone to start pulling this crap. She said. Parked in my driveway, claimed our shed, even told a contractor to start tearing down our back fence. What happened? I asked. I gave up. She said. I didn't have the money to fight her. Sold the house. Just wanted to be done. I asked if she'd be willing to help me. She didn't even pause. Hell yes. Let's bury her. I made copies of everything. Filed a formal complaint with the city. Sent Margie a certified letter with the original survey, the police report number, and a statement that we were seeking legal action. Then I played the long game. I started contacting local contractors. I made up a fake identity. Gregory Howard. A pretend real estate developer interested in buying Margie's home. I even made a Gmail account and business card. Reached out to her through a Buy My House Cash website she'd listed with 6 years ago. 2 weeks later, I get an email. Hi Gregory, I'd be open to discussing an offer. The area's getting worse and the new neighbors are aggressive. Aggressive? Right. I strung her along. Set up a fake showing. Told her I'd bring my partner, Rosalind. We met at a local Starbucks. Rosalind wore sunglasses and a scarf. Margie didn't recognize her. We sat. Talked numbers. I asked about the driveway. She said, and I quote, Technically it's not mine, but nobody ever argues. That was all I needed. I recorded it. I had her admitting she knew it wasn't hers. The next day, I sent that audio to my lawyer friend in Seattle, who agreed to help us pro bono. He drafted a cease and desist, along with a threat of civil suit for property interference and fraudulent claims. I hand-delivered it to her doorstep. She opened the door, saw me, and her face dropped. You want to keep playing? I said. Let's play. She slammed the door. The SUV disappeared the next morning. But I wasn't done yet. Because 3 days later, a city code officer showed up at her place with a clipboard. I'd filed an anonymous complaint about unpermitted structures in her yard, including the tool shed and that weird lattice covering her patio. They gave her 2 weeks to bring it all up to code, or face fines. Then I contacted every other neighbor who'd ever filed complaints. Some still lived on the block. I printed their cases, dropped them in their mailboxes with a note. If she ever harasses you, now's the time. Let's finish this. 2 of them got back to me that same week. And we weren't going to let her slither out this time. One of the neighbors who reached out was a guy named Eldon, lived at the other end of the block. He was quiet, retired, kind of kept to himself. I'd barely waved at him before all this started. But when he showed up at our door holding a thick manila envelope, I knew it was serious. I've got something you might want, he said. Inside were photos. Dozens of them. Dated, time-stamped, printed from an old home security system. Margie sneaking onto other people's properties at night. Moving fence stakes. Leaving letters in mailboxes. One photo, clear as day, showed her placing a traffic cone in someone's driveway at 3 a.m. to make it look blocked. She's been doing this since her husband died, Eldon said. Something snapped in her. She thinks if she acts like she owns it long enough, no one will fight back. He also told me something I hadn't heard before. She's been sued once already. Back in 2010. Lost the case, had to pay damages. But the owners moved away before collecting. She learned one thing from it: how far she could go before the law bites back. So I dug again. I went down to the courthouse and requested the 2010 case file. Sure enough, she'd pulled the same stunt, blocked a young couple's garage, faked a deed, dragged it out until they sold and left. But this time, I noticed something else in the file. Her signature. I compared it to the one on the squatter's rights claim she put in our mailbox. It didn't match. The slant, the shape of the M, even the way she wrote her last name. It was off. I brought it to my friend in Seattle. He got a handwriting expert to give us a statement. The garage claim was forged. It wasn't even her real signature. She printed some fake document from the internet and slapped it in our mailbox to scare us. That was criminal. Forgery. Mail fraud. But here's where it got strange. A week after we delivered the cease and desist, Margie disappeared. No car in the driveway. Lights off. Mail piling up. Even the neighbors were confused. She always walks her dog at 7 a.m., one said. Haven't seen her since Monday. I called her bluff. Walked over one afternoon and knocked. No answer. Then a guy in a gray Ford Ranger showed up a few days later. Said he was her nephew. Wanted to collect her mail. You know when she'll be back? I asked. No clue. Just said she needed time away. Said the neighbors were turning on her. He looked like he wanted to say more but didn't. I let him leave. That weekend we got a call from a real estate agent. Said Margie's property was going up for sale and asked if we'd be interested in buying a sliver of her land to resolve some old boundary confusion. I almost laughed out loud. She was trying to sell off part of her backyard to raise money, or to pay legal fees. She knew she was losing. But I wasn't going to let her vanish quietly. Because just when things seemed to be wrapping up, I found one more letter. This one was tucked into our recycle bin. Handwritten. Sloppy. Panicked. They took my last house. They'll try to take this one too. Protect what's yours. She'd signed it Mrs. M, like she didn't want her name on it. It wasn't a threat. It read more like a warning. Like someone who'd been running this scam so long, she'd started believing her own lies. Or maybe, she wasn't the only one involved. That letter stayed in my mind for days. Something about it didn't sit right. They took my last house. Not she lost it, they took it. I kept thinking about that. I started looking up Margie's history again, but not on the property records. I went deeper. I searched court records, civil suits, probate filings, old obituaries, anything that could tell me who Margie really was. That's when I found something I hadn't seen before. Her full name was Margie Ellen Kinlawn. Her husband, Thomas Kinlawn, died in 2009. But before that, there was a court case, Kinlawn vs. State of Washington, involving an elderly care fraud scheme. Nothing criminal, just a civil case. But there was a pattern. Apparently, Margie and her husband had once managed property transfers for dying seniors. They'd help clean up paperwork and move assets into trusts. Some of those seniors died without wills. And guess who ended up with temporary rights to those homes? Margie. Not officially. Not on paper. But she lived in those homes. Claimed them. Rented them. And when challenged, she fought with fake letters, fake deeds, forged surveys. By the time the courts caught up, she was already on to the next one. Suddenly it all made sense. This wasn't just a crazy neighbor. This was her playbook. She'd been doing it for over a decade. House to house. Widow to widow. Claiming space through lies, threats, and red tape. And we were supposed to be her next move. But this time, I wasn't scared. I was angry. And I wanted her to pay. So I made one final move. I sent everything I had to the county prosecutor. The fake deed. The audio recording. The forged squatter claim. The photos from Eldon. The handwriting analysis. And most importantly, the 2010 case where she'd been found guilty before. I didn't hear anything for 3 weeks. Then I got a call from an investigator. They'd opened a case. Margie came back one evening in late March. I watched from the front window as she pulled into her driveway in a different car. Same scowl on her face. But this time, a sheriff's cruiser pulled in behind her. They walked up to her door, knocked. She opened. Words were exchanged. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Just stood there, hands shaking, as they handed her a summons. Fraud. Forgery. False claim of property. She looked over at our house once. Just once. Then shut the door. 2 months later, I sat in the back of a small courtroom while Margie stood before a judge. Her nephew was there, silent, arms crossed. She looked tired. Older. Worn down. The prosecutor laid it all out. She didn't fight much of it. Maybe she was finally tired. Maybe she thought she could charm her way out again. But this time, the judge wasn't having it. She was fined $32,000. Forced to forfeit any false claims made in the last 10 years. Had a lien placed on her home. That meant she'd have to sell her house just to pay the damages. The house she used as her base for every scam she'd run on this block. It was poetic. But I wasn't clean either. Because the truth is, I changed. I wasn't proud of the fake identity, the baiting emails, the way I played dirty right back. I used lies to trap a liar. And part of me still wonders what that makes me. But when I step outside now, and see my wife's car in our driveway, and walk into our garage, I know we did what we had to do. Margie moved out in July. The house sold in October. We watched from the porch as the new owners pulled in. Young couple. First house. Just like us. They asked about the neighbors. We told them the truth. And when they looked toward Margie's old place and said, "Looks quiet," I just nodded and said, "It is now."